Single dad finds abandoned baby on a grocery store doorstep. He takes her in and cares for her like she's his own. But a millionaire witnesses everything and does something that shocks everyone. Comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The frigid pre-dawn air sliced through his skin like invisible razors as the 30-year-old single dad walked the deserted streets of the blue-collar neighborhood. His footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement as he returned from his second shift at the factory, his aching muscles protesting yet another day of hard labor. His kind eyes, which so many people had described as reflecting a rare goodness, were marked by the accumulated weariness of months spent juggling 2 jobs and caring for his 4-year-old son. The biting wind made dead leaves dance around his feet when a strange sound caught his attention. It was a faint cry, almost imperceptible, coming from the entrance of the small corner grocery store where he bought the basic necessities for home. He stopped, tilting his head to make sure he wasn't imagining things. The crying continued, a desperate wail that made his heart race. He slowly approached the dimly lit entrance of the store and felt the air leave his lungs when he saw the scene before his eyes. A baby of only a few months old was wrapped in a torn and dirty blanket, trembling violently against the frigid cold of the early morning. The child was alone, completely abandoned, with purple lips and skin far too pale for her age. Without thinking twice, he bent down and scooped the little one into his arms, feeling how she weighed almost nothing, almost as if she were made of paper. The blanket was soaked with dampness, and the baby's body was as cold as ice. He held her close to his chest, trying to warm her with his own body heat as he looked around for someone who could explain this terrible situation. The streets were completely empty. Not even the stray cats that usually appeared during the night were in sight. It was as if the whole world had conspired to leave this defenseless child alone in the darkness. He waited a few minutes, pacing back and forth in front of the store, hoping that someone would come to claim the baby. No one came. The decision was instinctive and irreversible. He tightened the blanket around the child and began to walk toward his modest home, a few blocks away. Each step was accompanied by a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts. How would he explain this to his son? How would he manage to support another child when he was already barely making ends meet with the salary from 2 jobs? But the baby had stopped crying in his arms and was now sleeping with a serene expression that melted any hesitation he might still have had. The small, simple house where he lived with his 4-year-old son was plunged into silence when he opened the front door. The peeling walls and old furniture told the story of a family that knew financial hardship well, but that had always managed to keep love and dignity above all else. He slowly climbed the creaking stairs, trying not to wake his son, who was sleeping in the next room. In the spare room that hadn't received any visitors in years, he improvised a crib using drawers and soft blankets that he kept in the closet. The baby continued to sleep soundly, and for the first time since he found her, he had the opportunity to observe her more closely. She was a beautiful girl, with delicate features and dark hair that was just starting to grow in small tufts. There was no note, no explanation, nothing that could indicate who her parents were or why they had made such a desperate decision. During the following weeks, the routine of the house changed completely. He woke up before dawn to prepare bottles and change diapers before taking his son to school and heading to his first job. The nights were dedicated to caring for the baby, who gradually gained weight and color, transforming into a healthy and smiling child. The 4-year-old boy accepted the presence of his adopted sister with surprising naturalness, helping with small tasks and singing to her when she cried. Money was tighter than ever. Diapers, formula, and baby medication consumed a significant portion of the already limited budget. He even considered contacting social services to report the abandonment, but every time he looked at the baby smiling in his arms, Something inside him refused to hand her over to strangers. She had become part of the family in a way that defied any rational explanation. It was during one of these difficult nights, when he was calculating the overdue bills at the kitchen table, that he noticed a strange movement in the street. A luxurious car, black and gleaming, was parked across the street, with tinted windows preventing him from seeing who was inside. It was an expensive model, completely out of place in the blue-collar neighborhood where he lived. The vehicle stayed there for almost an hour before leaving silently, leaving only the mystery of its unexplained presence. The next day, the same car returned, and the day after that too. The baby was growing quickly, already smiling when she saw his face, and reaching out her little arms whenever he approached the improvised crib. But the constant presence of that car began to bother him in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if someone was watching his every move, cataloguing every detail of his private life. 3 months had passed since that early morning that changed everything, and the single dad's life had found a new rhythm, albeit a precarious one. The baby, who now responded to the affectionate nickname Peanut, had become the gravitational center of the modest house. Her morning laughter filled the atmosphere with a contagious joy that made him forget, even if only momentarily, the financial difficulties that were accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon. The 4-year-old boy had adapted to the presence of his sister with a generosity that deeply touched his father's heart. Every morning he woke up eager to see if Peanut was already awake, running to the improvised crib with the clumsy steps of his age and whispering sweet words that he had learned by observing his father's behavior. It was common to find him humming nursery rhymes to her, or trying to make her laugh with funny faces that elicited clear, crystal laughter from the baby. But financial reality didn't forgive gestures of kindness. The electricity and water bills arrived with increasingly frightening amounts, and the salary from the 2 jobs barely covered the basic needs of the expanded family. Disposable diapers had become an impossible luxury, forcing him to resort to cloth diapers that he washed by hand every night after the children were asleep. The special baby formula consumed a disproportionate portion of the budget, leaving little room for other essential items such as medicine or suitable clothing for Peanut's rapid growth. It was on a particularly difficult afternoon when he was at the pharmacy trying to negotiate installment payments on an antibiotic for Peanut, who had developed a mild ear infection, that something extraordinary happened. The pharmacist, a grumpy man who never showed any kind of flexibility with payments, suddenly seemed to change his mind completely. He said that an anonymous customer had left a credit on the account, covering not only the antibiotic, but also a generous amount of other baby medications that might be needed in the coming months. The feeling was strange, a mixture of deep relief and growing distrust. Who could have done this? He didn't know anyone with enough resources for such generous gestures, and he certainly hadn't mentioned his financial difficulties to anyone beyond his closest circle of neighbors, who faced similar struggles to survive in the blue-collar neighborhood. The mystery deepened the following week when he received an unexpected call at work. The factory supervisor, known for his rigidity and parsimony with promotions, informed him that he had been chosen to fill a foreman position that had unexpectedly become available. The salary increase, albeit modest, would be enough to breathe a little easier financially. When he asked about the selection criteria, the supervisor only mumbled something about external recommendations and quickly changed the subject. The coincidences continued to accumulate in an almost surreal way. The electricity bill that arrived the following month showed an inexplicable discount for participation in a social program that he had never applied for. The owner of the small grocery store, where he did his basic shopping, began to insist that he take extra products without additional charge, claiming promotions that no one else in the neighborhood seemed to know about. Even the daycare center, where he intended to enroll Peanut when she reached the appropriate age, contacted him offering a full scholarship that would cover all costs. During this period of mysterious changes, the presence of the luxurious car on the street became more frequent and less discreet. Sometimes it appeared early in the morning when he left for work. Other times it was there when he returned from his second shift, always parked in the same location, always with tinted windows that prevented any identification of who was inside. The feeling of being watched grew until it became almost unbearable. It was on a rainy Saturday afternoon, when he was playing in the small backyard with the two children, that he finally decided to confront the situation. The car was there again, engine running, as if the driver were ready to leave at any sign of approach. He asked the 4-year-old boy to take care of Peanut and walked determinedly towards the vehicle. His footsteps seemed to echo like war drums on the wet pavement. Each meter traveled increased the tension in the air, as if he were approaching a moment that would completely define the course of his life. When he was a few meters from the car, the driver's door opened slowly, revealing a female figure who descended with calculated and elegant movements. The woman who emerged from the vehicle was a vision that defied any expectation he might have formed. She appeared to be in her 30s, wore expensive clothes that screamed sophistication and wealth, but her face carried an expression of vulnerability and pain that contrasted drastically with her external appearance of power. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, her makeup impeccable, but her eyes revealed sleepless nights and contained tears. She stared at him for long seconds, as if she were fighting an internal battle over what to say or do. The drizzle continued to fall, creating a translucent curtain between them that seemed to symbolize all the social and emotional barriers that separated them. When she finally spoke, her voice was both firm and trembling, filled with an emotion that she was clearly struggling to control. "I need to talk to you," she said, the words laden with a weight that he still couldn't fully understand. "About the baby you found 3 months ago, about how she got to that place, and about why I haven't been able to simply leave you alone since then." The world seemed to stop around him. The raindrops became slower, the noise of distant traffic turned into a muffled murmur, and even the air seemed to become denser and harder to breathe. He felt his legs tremble slightly as he processed the implications of those words. The mysterious woman in the luxurious car was not just a casual observer or an anonymous benefactor. She had a direct connection to Peanut, whom he had learned to love as his own daughter. The words of the mysterious woman echoed in the single dad's mind like a distant rumble of thunder, laden with implications that he still couldn't fully process. They stared at each other under the drizzle that continued to fall, creating an almost cinematic setting for a revelation that promised to shake the foundations of everything he had built in recent months. "Get in the car," she said, opening the back door of the luxurious vehicle. "We can't talk here in the rain, and what I have to tell you will take more than a few minutes." Her voice had a natural, commanding tone, like someone accustomed to being obeyed, but there was also an underlying fragility that made him hesitate for just a moment before accepting. The interior of the car was a completely different world from the universe where he lived daily. The soft leather of the seats, the absolute silence that insulated any external noise, the details in fine wood and polished metal spoke of a fortune that he could barely imagine. The woman settled into the seat next to him, maintaining a respectful distance, but making it clear that this conversation would change everything between them. "My name doesn't matter now," she began, looking through the darkened window toward the modest house where the two children continued to play, oblivious to the drama unfolding a few meters away. "What matters is that the baby you found that morning is my daughter. I left her there because—" Her voice faltered, and she needed a few seconds to gather the courage to continue. The initial shock gave way to a cold anger that began to grow in his chest like a controlled fire. How could someone abandon a defenseless child and then show up months later as if nothing had happened? But something in her expression, a pain so deep that it seemed physically palpable, made him wait to hear the rest of the explanation before exploding with the recriminations that were forming in his throat. 2 years ago, I lost my first daughter, she continued, the words coming out like shards of glass that cut through her own voice. She was only 6 months old when a terrible accident happened. I was driving, raining like today, and a truck. She didn't survive. I spent months in the hospital, not only for the physical injuries, but because I simply lost the ability to function as a human being. The narrative continued to flow like a painful confession that she had kept for too long. She explained how she had married very young to a much older man, a tech mogul who had amassed an impressive fortune through risky investments and ventures in emerging companies. The marriage had been more of a merger of social conveniences than a union based on true love, but she had found purpose in motherhood. When I found out I was pregnant again, 2 years after the accident, I panicked completely, she confessed, the tears finally breaching the barrier of self-control she had maintained for so long. Every movement of the baby in my womb reminded me of the daughter I had lost. Every doctor's appointment was torture. I was sure I would fail again, that something terrible would happen because of me. The single dad felt the anger being replaced by a reluctant but still painful understanding. He could imagine the suffering of losing a child, but he couldn't fully accept the decision to abandon another. She continued explaining how the delivery had been traumatic, how she had spiraled into postpartum depression that prevented her from touching the baby without feeling waves of panic and guilt. My husband traveled constantly to take care of business. His investments in international stocks required a constant presence in different countries, she said, revealing more details of her life of luxury that contrasted brutally with his reality. I was alone with a baby who constantly reminded me of my previous failure. The fortune he had amassed, the millions in invested capital, the assets scattered around the world, none of it mattered when I looked at her and could only see the daughter I had lost. The most shocking revelation came when she explained that she had specifically chosen that blue-collar neighborhood to abandon the baby because she had spent months observing the families in the area. She had seen how the ordinary people helped each other, how the children played in the streets with genuine joy, how love seemed more authentic there than in the privileged social circles where she lived. "I watched you for weeks before that night," she admitted, blushing slightly. "I saw how you took care of your son alone, how you worked 2 jobs but always came home with patience to play with him. I saw that you were the kind of man who would give her what I couldn't offer, unconditional love and genuine protection. The original plan had been to leave the baby and disappear forever, allowing a more emotionally capable family to offer her the opportunities she deserved. But the woman confessed that she had returned the next morning, consumed by guilt and regret, only to discover that he had taken the child home. Instead of introducing herself at that moment, she decided to observe from afar. When I saw how you became a real family, how she flourished under your care, I knew I had made the right decision for the wrong reason," she said, struggling to maintain her composure. "But I also realized that I couldn't just disappear from her life. I started helping financially because I felt it was my responsibility to make sure she had everything she needed." The tension in the car became almost unbearable when she revealed that she had used her influence and resources to completely investigate his life. She knew about his 2 jobs, his financial difficulties, his dedication to the children, even intimate details about his daily routine. The feeling of invasion of privacy mixed with a magnetic attraction that he couldn't deny, creating an emotional whirlwind that left him completely disoriented. "I didn't come here to take her away from you," she said finally, her voice laden with a sincerity that he felt to his bones. "I came because I need to be part of her life somehow. And because she hesitated, looking directly into his eyes for the first time during the entire conversation, because these months watching you have made me realize that maybe I can learn to be a mother again if I have the right guidance. At that moment, the door of the house opened and the 4-year-old boy came running out into the rain, shouting that Peanut was crying and he didn't know how to calm her. Reality struck them like a lightning bolt, reminding them that 2 children needed immediate care, regardless of the adult dramas unfolding inside the luxurious car. The woman looked in the direction of the house with an expression of mixed longing and fear, as if she were seeing something she desperately wanted, but feared she didn't deserve. The desperate cry of the 4-year-old boy cut through the emotional tension like a sharp blade, bringing both adults back to the immediate reality. The single dad got out of the car without hesitation, running toward the house as the rain completely soaked his clothes. The woman followed him a few steps behind, hesitant, as if each meter she traveled toward the house was a dangerous emotional territory that she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. Inside the modest house, the baby was crying with an intensity that made the walls seem to vibrate. The boy was standing next to the improvised crib, tears mixing with the raindrops on his small face, clearly distressed that he couldn't calm his adopted sister. The single dad immediately picked Peanut up, checking if she had a fever or any physical discomfort, while murmuring reassuring words with the expertise of someone who had learned to read every nuance of infant cries. The woman stopped at the doorway, observing the scene with a complex mixture of emotions etched on her face. It was the first time in months that she was physically close to the daughter she had abandoned, and the proximity awakened a storm of contradictory feelings. The maternal love that she had tried to suppress for so long fought against the paralyzing fear of causing more harm than good. "She's got colic," the single dad said, glancing over his shoulder while making gentle movements with the baby. "It happens sometimes in the late afternoon. It usually calms down when I give her a light tummy massage." His words were directed as much to the worried boy as to the woman in the doorway, and she perceived the implicit generosity in the gesture of including her in such an intimate moment of family routine. The days that followed were a delicate exercise in emotional navigation. The woman began to visit daily, always in the late afternoon, bringing expensive gifts that he initially refused to accept. She insisted that they weren't attempts to buy affection, but rather ways to contribute to the well-being of the daughter she had abandoned. Gradually, he began to accept practical items, better quality diapers, premium formula, little outfits that Peanut really needed as she grew. During these visits, a strange but functional routine began to establish itself. She watched from afar while he demonstrated the basics: how to prepare the bottle at the right temperature, how to change diapers efficiently, how to recognize the different types of cries and their respective needs. The woman absorbed every detail with the intensity of someone studying for the most important exam of her life. The first time she held Peanut again was after 2 weeks of visits. Her hands trembled visibly when he extended the child toward her, and for a terrible moment it seemed like she was going to refuse or even faint. But when the little one snuggled naturally against her chest and smiled, something fundamental broke inside her. The tears came in waves that she couldn't control, years of pain and guilt dissolving in that moment of reconnection. "She recognizes me," she whispered between sobs. "After everything I've done, she still recognizes me." The single dad felt his own throat tighten with the raw emotion of the scene. Seeing that strong, controlled woman completely fall apart in her daughter's arms was something deeply touching and at the same time disturbing. During this period of family readjustment, he discovered fascinating details about her life that contradicted his initial expectations. The fortune she controlled had been built by her late husband through risky investments in emerging tech companies. She herself had a background in child psychology, a cruel irony considering her inability to cope with her own motherhood after the trauma of the loss. "My husband left everything to me when he died last year," she revealed during one of those afternoons of coexistence while watching Peanut play on the living room rug. Millions in stocks, properties scattered in different countries, investments in investment funds that yield more in a month than most people earn in a year. But none of that served to prepare me to be a mother again. The tension between them grew every day, not only because of the delicate situation involving Peanut's custody, but because of a magnetic attraction that neither of them could completely deny. There were moments when their eyes met for longer than necessary, when the accidental touch of their hands during the care of the child sent waves of electricity through both. It was an emotional complication that made everything even more complex and potentially dangerous. The definitive turning point came when she revealed the whole truth about the abandonment of Peanut. During a particularly violent storm that forced them to stay in the house for longer than usual, she finally confessed that she had received anonymous threats related to her husband's inheritance. Distant relatives who felt aggrieved by the will had hired private investigators who discovered the existence of Peanut and threatened to use her as a means of pressure to contest the will. They said they would kidnap her and use her as a bargaining chip to force me to give up part of the inheritance, she confessed, her voice laden with a pain that she had kept to herself for months. I was completely alone, still struggling with depression, and I panicked completely. I thought that if I hid her in a place where no one could find her, I would be protecting her life. The revelation completely changed his perspective on the whole situation. What he had interpreted as cruel abandonment was actually a desperate act of maternal protection. She had sacrificed her own happiness and the chance to raise her daughter to keep her safe from dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to use an innocent child for sordid financial goals. The investigators they hired finally gave up the search after a few months, she continued, but I couldn't risk bringing her back. So I started watching you from afar, making sure she was safe and well cared for. Seeing how she flourished under your care made me realize that maybe I could learn to be the mother she deserves, if I could overcome my own demons. In the following months, they worked together to create an arrangement that benefited all parties involved. She sold most of her properties and transferred a large portion of her investments to education funds that would guarantee the future of both children. With the remaining money, she bought a modest house in the same neighborhood, close enough to allow daily coexistence, but respecting the autonomy of the family he had built. The attraction between them developed slowly, built on a solid foundation of mutual respect and shared love for the children. It wasn't a fairy tale romance, but a deep connection between two people who had found healing for their wounds through the joint care of two innocent souls who needed both to fully flourish. The wedding took place 2 years later, in a simple ceremony held at the same grocery store where everything had begun. The local community celebrated the union as proof that true love can be born from the most unlikely circumstances. Peanut, now a laughing and healthy child, served as a flower girl, while the 4-year-old boy, now 6, proudly carried the rings. They transformed pain into hope, loneliness into family, and distrust into true love, proving that sometimes the greatest blessings in life come disguised as the greatest challenges.